In the sweltering summer of 1716, a gathering of 14 of South Carolina's wealthiest plantation owners at the Greyfield estate culminated in a scene of unimaginable horror that would send shockwaves through the colony and forever alter the master-slave dynamic. These men, members of the powerful Rice Council that dictated the agricultural and social policies of the region, had convened for what they presumed was a routine meeting to discuss crop prices, slave management techniques, and strategies for expanding their profitable but brutal enterprises. Instead, they encountered a meticulously planned reckoning at the hands of a woman they had considered mere property. For 15 years, Espiranza de Lima, an enslaved woman of Angolan royal lineage, had served them silently, absorbing every detail of their conversations, their cruelties, and their vulnerabilities. Witnessing the casual destruction of families, the implementation of systematic torture, and finally, the plan to reduce her to a breeding animal, she resolved to demonstrate that even the most powerless could wield devastating power when pushed beyond endurance. Using her knowledge of herbs to subdue them, the plantation's own iron shackles to restrain them, and the immense kitchen furnace as her instrument of justice, she subjected these architects of misery to a slow, agonizing end, forcing them to experience the helplessness and dehumanization they had inflicted on thousands. The colonial government, terrified of the precedent and the potential for widespread insurrection, sealed the records and buried the truth, but the psychological impact was irreversible. The story of Espiranza de Lima, whether she perished or escaped to fuel further resistance, became a potent legend among enslaved communities, proving that the foundation of the plantation system was built on fear, a fear that could be turned against the masters themselves. The story begins not with the massacre itself, but 15 years earlier, in the bustling port city of Charleston, South Carolina, in 1701. The colony was in the midst of an unprecedented economic boom, its prosperity built entirely on the backs of enslaved Africans who labored in the brutal rice plantations of the coastal lowlands. Among the most successful and notoriously cruel of these planters was Edmund Greyfield, a second-generation colonist, whose family had carved a 3,000-acre empire from the swamplands north of the Ashley River. Greyfield was a man of particular brutality, even by the harsh standards of the time. Standing over 6 feet tall with piercing pale blue eyes, he had earned a fearsome reputation for breaking slaves both physically and psychologically. His plantation, Greyfield Estate, was whispered about in slave quarters throughout the region as a place from which few returned unchanged, either dying within a year or emerging as hollow shells of their former selves. In September of 1701, the Portuguese slave ship Santa Maria arrived in Charleston Harbor, carrying 180 souls captured from the coast of Angola. Among them was a young woman of about 20, who would be given the name Espiranza de Lima by her new owner. To the white colonists who inspected her like livestock at the market, she appeared to be just another healthy young captive, but they were utterly unaware of her true background. She was the daughter of a powerful village chief, trained from childhood in strategy, negotiation, and a sophisticated understanding of herbs, poisons, and human psychology, arts her captors would have dismissed as mere witchcraft. She had witnessed Portuguese raiders burn her village, murder her father, and enslave her people. In her mind, every white face she encountered was connected to this original sin. Edmund Greyfield purchased her for £42, a considerable sum, with specific plans for her as a replacement for his previous house slave, an older woman who had recently died under mysterious circumstances widely understood to be the result of a fatal beating. From her first day at Greyfield Estate, Espiranza embarked on a 15-year campaign of careful observation and meticulous planning. She learned English rapidly but pretended to comprehend far less than she actually did. She watched, listened, and remembered every slight, every cruelty, every name mentioned in hushed conversations among the plantation elite. Greyfield Estate functioned as more than a home. It was the unofficial meeting place for the Rice Council, a group of 14 plantation owners who controlled the colony's agricultural policies and by extension its political future. These men, including William Peton, the largest rice producer, James Rutherford, a colonial judge, Marcus Sutton, a major slave trader, and Henry Caldwell, with his powerful political connections, met monthly to discuss rice prices, slave regulations, and methods to maximize profit while minimizing oversight from London. They saw themselves as visionary pioneers building a civilization, willfully blind to the fact that their wealth was built on a foundation of systematic brutality and the unpaid labor of thousands treated worse than livestock. For 15 years, Espiranza served at these meetings, moving silently through the dining room like a shadow, refilling glasses and clearing plates while these men discussed their human property with casual cruelty. She heard them laugh about separating families, debate the merits of whipping versus branding, and plan expansions requiring the importation of hundreds more slaves. Yet it was not the general horror of slavery alone that finally ignited her plan for vengeance. It was something more personal and immediate. In the spring of 1715, Espiranza had found love with a man known as Quain, listed in plantation records as Boy Tom. Born on the Rutherford plantation, Quain possessed a rare combination of physical strength and intellectual curiosity, and he had secretly learned to read. Together they built a sophisticated intelligence network, communicating through songs and gestures that appeared innocuous to white observers, but carried detailed messages about escape routes and resistance opportunities. They were planning a coordinated uprising to free hundreds across multiple plantations. Their careful planning was shattered in March 1716, when, during a Rice Council meeting, Espiranza overheard Greyfield announce the expansion of his breeding program. Her name was at the top of the list. She was to be reduced to a breeding animal, moved to an isolated compound, and cut off from Quain and their plans. That night at their secret meeting place, Quain begged her to flee with him immediately to Spanish Florida. But Espiranza refused. Running would save them but change nothing for their people. She had spent 15 years learning the council's patterns, secrets, and vulnerabilities. She saw one chance to deliver a message that would echo through history, to make these men feel the fear they inflicted on others. They spent the next 2 weeks refining a plan that was part intelligence operation, part psychological warfare, and part tactical strike, centered on the upcoming Rice Council meeting on June 23, 1716. Espiranza's plan exploited the planters' profound carelessness born from absolute power. Her key instrument was the estate's massive coal-burning furnace, an 8-foot-tall imported marvel of which Greyfield was particularly proud, capable of reaching temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. For months she had studied its operation and secretly stockpiled coal. 3 days before the meeting, a devastating blow solidified her resolve. Quain had been sold to Rutherford and would be transferred after the meeting. Their final meeting was a heart-wrenchful farewell. Quain understood her determination was unshakable. The following morning, she began her final preparations, increasing the furnace's temperature under the guise of cooking for the meeting and positioning iron shackles, normally used to punish slaves, at strategic points throughout the house. On June 23, the council members arrived as usual, brimming with confidence. Espiranza served them a meal laced with a herbal mixture she had prepared based on knowledge from her grandmother, designed to induce unconsciousness. As the brandy flowed and the men discussed their brutal business, including a new scheme to export less productive slaves to even deadlier Spanish mines, the drug took effect. Within 20 minutes all 14 men were unconscious. With methodical efficiency, Espiranza bound each man hand and foot with their own iron shackles, whispering to them in Portuguese and English about the specific cruelties she had witnessed them commit. She then dragged each heavy, inert body to the kitchen, arranging them in a circle around the blazing furnace, their mouths stuffed with raw cotton to silence them upon waking. As dawn broke, the men regained consciousness to a nightmare. Helpless, restrained, and subjected to unbearable heat, they faced Espiranza, who sat calmly sharpening kitchen knives. She spoke to them in clear, fluent English, recounting their crimes in detail, the families destroyed, the torture techniques perfected, the lives reduced to entries in a ledger. She then retrieved iron rods heated in the furnace until they glowed cherry red and began applying them to non-fatal areas of their bodies, ensuring they remained conscious and in agony for hours. The psychological torture was as devastating as the physical pain. She forced them to confront their own humanity and the consequences of their choices. As the temperature in the kitchen soared past 130 degrees, she prevented them from succumbing to heat stroke by applying wet cloths and giving them sips of water, stating, "Death is a mercy, and you have not earned mercy yet." The torture lasted throughout the day and into the evening. Finally, she dragged each man closer to the furnace, where the radiant heat slowly cooked them alive, a method she had heard Marcus Sutton describe using. Edmund Greyfield, the last to die, attempted to bargain with her with offers of money and freedom. Her response was cold and final. "I want you to die knowing that you were wrong. You are just a man who chose to be evil." By midnight, all 14 men were dead. The next morning, other slaves discovered the horrific scene, 14 charred corpses in a circle around the furnace, and Espiranza sitting calmly sharpening knives and humming a Portuguese lullaby. The overseers and colonial authorities were terrified, not only by the violence, but by its implications. If one enslaved woman could orchestrate this, what could a coordinated uprising achieve? Governor Robert Johnson convened an emergency session, and they decided to seal the records, claiming the men died in a tragic accidental fire. Espiranza presented a dilemma. Public execution would spread the dangerous story. Instead, she was secretly sentenced to be sold to the deadly silver mines of Spanish South America. Officially, she died of fever on the ship, Santa Isabella, and was buried at sea, but rumors persisted that she had escaped or had allies in Spanish territory. The psychological impact of the Greyfield massacre was profound and lasting. Plantation owners, once arrogantly confident, now traveled with armed guards and avoided predictable routines. Meetings of the Rice Council ceased indefinitely. A wave of unrest swept through slave communities, marked by kitchen fires, poisoned livestock, and mysterious accidents, all suggesting organized resistance and sophisticated intelligence gathering. Some owners slightly improved treatment out of fear, while others increased brutality, often backfiring and inspiring more resistance. New laws restricting slave movement were enacted, but were difficult to enforce. The story of Espiranza de Lima became legendary among enslaved people, a symbol that resistance was possible and that masters were not invulnerable. This shift in psychological balance, the erosion of absolute power and absolute powerlessness, planted the seeds for future rebellions, the Underground Railroad, and ultimately the downfall of the plantation system. The kitchen at Greyfield stood empty for decades, shunned by slaves, but the lesson endured. Those who treat people as property do so at their own peril, for property can think, plan, remember, and when pushed too far, fight back. Justice, as Espiranza said, burns slower than coal, but it burns complete.